Before we begin today's video, let's practice a bit of mindfulness. Firstly, look at the screen, then slowly close your eyes. And as you do, just leave your mind blank. Then, take in a deep breath through the nose, slowly, then out through the mouth. One more time, in through the nose, and out through the mouth. And one last one. Now slowly open your eyes, and let's begin today's video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the brain, its definition, parts, and functions. The brain is a complex organ that controls thought, memory, emotion, touch, motor skills, vision, breathing, temperature, hunger, and every process that regulates our body. Together, the brain and spinal cord that extend from it make up the central nervous system, or CNS for short. The brain, weighing about 3 pounds in the average adult. The brain is about 60% fat. The remaining 40% is a combination of water, protein, carbohydrates, and salts. The brain itself is not a muscle. It contains blood vessels and nerves, including neurons and glial cells. Now that we understand the definition of the brain and what it's made of, we can now break down and explain each part of the brain's anatomy. This picture shows us every lobe of the brain along with the cerebellum and spinal cord, which I will exclude because even though it's part of the central nervous system, CNS, it's technically not a part of the brain's anatomy. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the largest lobe of the brain, located in the front of the head. The frontal lobe is involved in personality characteristics, decision making, and movement. Recognition and smell usually involve parts of the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe contains the Broca's area, which is associated with speech ability. The parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is the middle part of the brain that helps a person identify objects and understand spatial relationships, which is where one's body is compared with objects around the person. The parietal lobe is also involved in interpreting pain and touch in the body. The parietal lobe houses Wernicke's area, which helps the brain understand spoken language. The occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the back part of the brain that is involved with vision. The temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is the sides of the brain that are involved in short-term memory, speech, musical rhythm, and some degree of smell recognition. The cerebellum. The cerebellum, or little brain, is the fist-sized portion of the brain located at the back of the head, below the temporal and occipital lobes, and above the brainstem. Like the cerebral cortex, it has two hemispheres, the outer portion and the inner area. The outer portion contains neurons, and the inner area communicates with the cerebral cortex. Its function is to coordinate voluntary muscle movements and to maintain posture, balance, and equilibrium. New studies are exploring the cerebellum's role in thought, emotions, and social behavior, as well as possible involvement in 3 layers of protective covering, called meninges, surround the brain and the spinal cord. And I will briefly list and explain all of these 3 layers. The dura mater. The dura mater is the outermost layer of the brain and is thick and tough. It includes 2 layers called the periosteal layer and the meningeal layer. The periosteal layer of the dura mater lines the inner dome of the skull, otherwise known as the cranium, and the meningeal layer creates several dural folds that divide the cranial cavity into freely communicating spaces. Spaces between the layers allow for the passage of veins and arteries that supply blood flow to the brain. The arachnoid matter. The arachnoid matter is a thin, web-like layer of connective tissue that does not contain nerves or blood vessels, and its function is to contain the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF for short. This fluid cushions the entire central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and continually circulates around these structures to remove impurities. The pia mater. The pia mater is a thin membrane that hugs the surface of the brain and follows its contours. The pia mater is rich with veins and arteries. Within the brain, there are more deeper structures that all have their own functions. I will now briefly explain these deeper structures. The pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, sometimes called the master gland, is a pea-sized structure found deep in the brain behind the bridge of the nose. The pituitary gland governs the function of other glands in the body, regulating the flow of hormones from the thyroid, adrenals, ovaries, and testicles. It receives chemical signals from the hypothalamus through its stalk and blood supply. The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is located above the pituitary gland and sends its chemical messages that control its function. It regulates body temperature, synchronizes sleep patterns, controls hunger and thirst, and also plays a role in some aspects of memory and emotion. The amygdala. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure inside of your brain. It's part of a larger network in your brain called the limbic system. When it comes to your survival, your amygdala and limbic system are extremely important. These are parts of your brain that automatically detect danger. They also play a role in behavior, emotional control, and learning. The hippocampus. The hippocampus is a curved, seahorse-shaped organ on the underside of each temporal lobe. The hippocampus is part of a larger structure called the hippocampal formation. It supports memory, learning, navigation, and perception of space. It receives information from the cerebral cortex and may play a role in Alzheimer's disease. The pineal gland. The pineal gland is located deep in the brain and attached by a stalk to the top of the third ventricle. The pineal gland responds to light and dark and secretes melatonin, which regulates circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle. Ventricles and cerebrospinal fluid. I've talked about the cerebrospinal fluid, but now I will dive into deeper details about it. Deep in the brain are 4 open areas with passageways between them. They also open in the central spinal canal and the area beneath arachnoid layer of the meninges. The ventricles manufacture cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, a watery fluid that circulates in and around the ventricles and the spinal cord, and between the meninges. CSF surrounds and cushions the spinal cord and brain, washes out waste and impurities, and delivers nutrients. There are 2 sets of blood vessels that supply blood and oxygen to the brain. They are called the vertebral arteries and the carotid arteries. The external carotid arteries extend up the sides of your neck and are where you can feel your pulse when you touch the area with your fingertips. The internal carotid arteries branch into the skull and circulate blood to the front parts of the brain. The vertebral arteries follow the spinal column into the skull, where they join together at the brainstem and form the basilar artery, which supplies blood to the rear portions of the brain. Lastly, to conclude the artery section of the brain anatomy, the circle of Willis. The circle of Willis is a loop of blood vessels near the bottom of the brain that connects major arteries, circulates blood from the front of the brain to the back, and helps the arterial systems communicate with one another. Inside the cranium, or dome of the skull, there are 12 nerves called cranial nerves, and I will list and explain all of these different cranial nerves and their functions. The olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve is the nerve that allows for your sense of smell. The optic nerve. The optic nerve is the nerve that governs eyesight. The oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve is a nerve that controls pupil response and other motions of the eye, and branches out from the area in the brainstem where the midbrain meets the pons. The trochlear nerve. The trochlear nerve controls muscles in the eye. It emerges from the back of the midbrain part of the brainstem. The trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve is the largest and most complex of the cranial nerves, with both sensory and motor function. It originates from the pons and conveys sensation from the scalp, feet, jaw, sinuses, parts of the mouth and face to the brain. Allows the function of chewing muscles and much more. The abducens nerve. The abducens nerve innervates some of the muscles in the eye. The facial nerve supports face movement, taste, glandular, and other functions. The vestibulocochlear nerve. The vestibulocochlear nerve facilitates balance and hearing. The glossopharyngeal nerve. The glossopharyngeal nerve allows taste, ear, and throat movement and has many more functions. The vagus nerve. The vagus nerve allows sensation around the ear and the digestive system and controls motor activity in the heart, throat, and digestive system. The accessory nerve. The accessory nerve innervates specific muscles in the head, neck, and shoulder. The hypoglossal nerve. The hypoglossal nerve supplies motor activity to the tongue. The first two nerves I listed originate in the cerebrum. These two nerves are the olfactory nerve and the optic nerve. Besides those two nerves, the remaining 10 cranial nerves emerge from the brainstem, which has three parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. Since the information I'm about to say about the brain isn't really enough to fill up a whole chapter or chapter section, I'll just leave it as a part of the cranial nerve section. So what is the gray matter and white matter? There are gray matter and white matter in the brain. The gray and white matter are two different regions of the central nervous system. In the brain, gray matter refers to the darker outer portion, while white matter describes the lighter inner section underneath. In the spinal cord, this order is reversed. The white matter is on the outside and the gray matter sits within. Gray matter is primarily composed of neuron somas, the round central cell bodies, and white matter is mostly made of axons, the long stems that connect neurons together, wrapped in myelin, a protective coating. The different composition of neuron parts is why the two appear as separate shades on certain scans. Each region serves a different role. Gray matter is primarily responsible for processing and interpreting information, while white matter transmits that information to other parts of the nervous system. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about mental health disorders and causes of mental health disorders. Before we talk about some common mental health disorders, let's first understand what mental health disorders mean. A mental health disorder is any disorder that causes a person to experience different behaviors than their norm or an altered mood or pattern of thinking. Now that we understand what mental health disorder means, we can now dive into the different mental health disorders that people experience or commonly experience in the world. Anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders differ from normal feelings of nervousness or anxiousness and involve excessive fear or anxiety. Anxiety disorders are the most common of mental disorders. They affect nearly 30% of adults at some point in their lives. Some examples of anxiety disorders include panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD for short, and phobias. Mood disorders. A mood disorder, also known as an affective disorder, is any of a group of conditions of mental and behavioral disorder where a disturbance in the person's mood is the main underlying feature. It's common for mood disorders to arise during adolescence, but people may be affected at any age, even into adulthood. About 15% of children and adolescents are affected by mood disorders. Females are more likely to experience mood disorders than males. Some common mood disorders include depression and bipolar disorder. Eating disorder. An eating disorder is a mental health condition where you use the control of food to cope with feelings and other situations. The most common eating disorders are anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. Most eating disorders involve focusing too much on weight, body shape, and food. This can lead to dangerous eating behaviors. These behaviors can seriously affect the ability to get the nutrition your body needs. Personality disorders. Personality disorders are a class of mental disorders characterized by enduring maladaptive patterns of behavior, cognition, and inner experience, exhibited across many contexts and deviating from those accepted by the individual's culture. Some common personality disorders include antisocial personality disorder, ASPD for short, borderline personality disorder, BPD for short, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. PTSD is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders are severe mental disorders that cause abnormal thinking and perceptions. Some examples of psychotic disorders include schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Migraines. A migraine is a type of headache characterized by recurrent attacks of moderate to severe throbbing and pulsating pain on one side of the head. Some other examples of headaches, as shown on the screen, include sinus, cluster, and tension. Now that we looked at some common mental health disorders, we're now going to talk about some causes of these common mental health conditions. Some causes for mental health disorders include childhood abuse, trauma or neglect, social isolation or loneliness, experiencing discrimination and stigma including racism, social disadvantage, poverty or debt, severe or long-term stress, having a long-term physical health condition, unemployment or losing your job, homelessness or poor housing, being a long-term care for someone, drug and alcohol misuse, domestic violence, bullying or other abuse as an adult, significant trauma as an adult such as military combat, being involved in serious incident in which you feared for your life, or being the victim of a violent crime. Physical causes, for example, a head injury or a neurological condition such as epilepsy, can have an impact on your behavior and mood. It's important to rule out potential physical causes before seeking further treatment for a mental health problem. It might seem there are many mental health disorders and causes, but there's also ways to take care of your mental health to prevent those mental health disorders or illnesses. And some of these ways include getting regular exercise. Just 30 minutes of walking every day can boost your mood and improve your health. Eat healthy, regular meals and stay hydrated. A balanced diet and plenty of water can improve your energy and focus throughout the day. Make sleep a priority. Stick to a schedule and make sure you're getting enough sleep. Try a relaxing activity. Explore relaxation or wellness programs or apps, which may incorporate meditation, muscle relaxation, or breathing exercises. Set goals and priorities. Decide what must get done now and what can wait. Learn to say no to new tasks if you start to feel like you're taking on too much. Try to appreciate what you have accomplished at the end of the day. Practicing gratitude. Remind yourself daily of things you're grateful for. Be specific, write them down, or replay them in your mind. Focus on positivity. Identify and challenge your negative and unhelpful thoughts. Stay connected. Reach out to friends or family members who can provide emotional support and practical help. On a side note, I talked about rare eye illnesses for the video about the eye, so I didn't want to leave it out for this video. So I'll go ahead and list some rare mental disorders, which include Alice in Wonderland syndrome, alien hand syndrome, Stendhal syndrome, and depersonalization or derealization disorder. Unfortunately, we have now reached the end of today's video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Fortunately, I'm still going to be posting more videos for your entertainment and knowledge gain. And before I go, please like and subscribe because it helps the video a lot. Have a great day everyone, and see you in the next video.